December 1776. At a secret location along the French coast, a shipment is being prepared. Rifles, uniforms, gunpowder, and ammunition are crated and boarded, bound for America. It is a gesture of solidarity from France against their common enemy, Great Britain. The weapons will aid Washington's notoriously undersupplied army, which has just unleashed a Christmas surprise on the British. The Battle of Trenton has bolstered the rebels. But America needs more than supplies to turn the tide of war. What General George Washington really needs is money and a navy. In pursuit of this goal, the Americans have sent their own secret weapon to France. He arrives on a crisp December morning along the French coast. He is old and frail, with a variety of ailments. But Benjamin Franklin is also the most famous revolutionary leader in Europe. Franklin is the man who tamed lightning, a renowned scientist, inventor, and writer who brought the simple wisdom of Poor Richard to the world.
When Franklin gets to France, there's an enormous sense of consternation. What is this figurehead? What is this great celebrity doing here? And remember, given the way the media worked in those days, he washes up on the shores of Brittany with no announcement, and there are all sorts of wonderful rumors afoot as to what he's doing in France. He's come to buy himself a chateau with his immense fortune. He's come to educate his grandsons in Europe because the schools are better. Every possible idea is put forth. The idea that he's actually there to enlist the French in this cause is not the obvious conclusion. And he doesn't feel he has to illuminate anyone.
Franklin arrives into a deeply divided nation, no place more so than Paris itself. The wealthy live in opulence, while the poor walk on city streets ankle deep in waste and excrement. This dichotomy has produced new thinking about Europe's age-old system of class. The French read Thomas Paine and cheer America's revolution. As one Frenchman noted, there is 100 times more enthusiasm for this revolution in the Paris cafes than in the colonies. Franklin plays on this enthusiasm. Now, in one of the most opulent courts in Europe, the home of Marie Antoinette, Franklin presents a simple yet carefully crafted portrait of America and all things American.
Picture me very plainly dressed, wearing my thin gray straight hair that peeps out from under my only coiffure, a fine fur cap which comes down to my forehead almost to my spectacles. Think how this must appear among the powdered heads of Paris. Benjamin Franklin.
Franklin plays on this romance. He dresses very plainly, he wears a beaver cap, and he becomes kind of a fad. The women love to be around Franklin. They think there's something kind of very romantic about this backwoodsman who's here in their midst.
Before long, all the fashionable women are wearing their hair in a style that mimics Franklin's fur cap. They call the style à la Franklin. But not all quarters are equally charmed. December 28, 1776. Ben Franklin arrives at Versailles, home to King Louis XVI.
It seems like a fool's errand when you think about it. Franklin is sent to an absolute monarchy to ask them to fund a revolution against a king. But the truth is that the animus on the French part against the English is so great that this is a very easy argument to make.
Franklin is greeted by France's foreign minister, the crafty Comte de Vergennes. Vergennes is the one behind France's covert arms shipments.
Anyone in his right mind would have assumed that the best thing to do would have been to let the colonies and England destroy each other mutually and not to intervene. But he is dead set on revenge. It's the one thing he needs to accomplish, and he could not be more eager.
He is intrigued by the revolution, but France needs to know they are backing a winner. Franklin's attuned sense of gamesmanship tells him the time is not right. That, and the fact King Louis XVI refuses to meet with him. But without France, the threadbare American Revolution is in peril. For now, Franklin will have to wait and pin his hopes on events 3,000 miles away. where only a great American victory could budge the French. But that couldn't seem less likely. Back in New Jersey, the Continental Army is in bad shape. The Americans have not yet figured out how to feed and supply the army. John Adams, the always outspoken member of Congress, complains,
"Our army is an object of wretchedness enough to fill a human mind with horror. Disgraced, defeated, discontented, dispirited, diseased, naked, undisciplined, eaten up with vermin. No clothes, beds, or blankets. No medicines, no victuals but salt pork and flour."
And as winter turns to spring, the problems only worsen. No one is joining the army. And officers sent on recruiting missions must dig deeper to fill the quotas for new recruits.
The colonists, like every generation before or after, seem convinced that the war is going to be over by Christmas. When the war isn't over by Christmas, Washington has a hard time recruiting soldiers. And it's in 1777 that we see many states beginning to offer significantly increased bounties. That's a cash payment for enlistment. Service in the Continental Army is now offered as an alternative to corporal punishment when you're brought into court. Service in the Continental Army is encouraged for vagrants.
The shortages of trained soldiers hits the Army hard. No place more than the northern American outpost of Fort Ticonderoga, where America's inexperienced recruits are about to become the target of a major British attack. America's envoy in Paris, Benjamin Franklin, has made his first overtures to the French, an attempt to get the European power to join in the fight against their age-old enemy, England. But for now, the elder statesman has come away empty-handed. Swaying the French will take a major American victory back in the colonies, where the British are getting ready to mount a new round of assaults. June 1777. Just south of Montreal, Canada, a new British general has arrived in America. General John Burgoyne surrounds himself with all the trappings that wealth and status afford. He has recently returned to the colonies, where he witnessed the British loss of Boston just 2 years earlier. Burgoyne's goal, to take revenge and end the war, whatever the cost. It is an endgame he has staked his career on. John Burgoyne has always led the good life. A gambler, a military man by career, a playwright by hobby, a social climber by marriage, Gentleman Johnny, as his soldiers call him, leans towards the dramatic. Before his return to America in June, the cocky Burgoyne wagers that he will have the war won by Christmas. Charles Fox, a member of Parliament who stood in opposition to the war, takes the bet with a warning.
Be not over-sanguine. I believe when you return to England, you will be a prisoner on parole. Charles Fox.
As commander of Britain's northern forces, Burgoyne aims to take the Hudson River, the vital waterway that separates the northern colonies from the southern colonies.
It's important to realize that in the 18th century, there are no bridges across this river. There are only a limited number of crossing points. If you control those points, you control key terrain, and you are able to sever the lines of communication that the colonists are able to use to coordinate their actions between Boston and Philadelphia, and certainly prohibit the transfer of troops from one side of the river to the other.
The British plan requires precise coordination across great distances. Burgoyne's force will move south down the Hudson to meet up with the man in charge for the British, General William Howe, whose forces will march north from New York City. Burgoyne's first target is a remote northern outpost, the mighty Fort Ticonderoga.
People referred to it as the Gibraltar of the North or the Gibraltar of North America. It was, by all standards, the most spectacular fortress in North America. Angled bastions, very defensible, and it sits astride this very, very strategic water corridor.
July 2nd, 1777. General Burgoyne's force of 8,000 descends upon Fort Ticonderoga. The undermanned Americans are at a mighty disadvantage. Just 2,500 Continentals guard the fort. Skirmishes break out around the stronghold as British soldiers snipe at the Americans. But taking the fort will require a strategic advantage. Fort Ticonderoga sits on a peninsula surrounded by 3 mountains, but the lean American forces can only defend 2 of them. The steepest and most formidable, the aptly named Mount Defiance, is left unprotected. But from its ridge, artillery has an easy shot into the fort. It is the weak spot that Burgoyne will exploit. July 5th. Burgoyne dispatches a unit to the west side of Mount Defiance. Their mission, to drag their cannon to the top. It is a treacherous climb, but out of sight of the Americans. By noon, they crest the ridge and position themselves for a clear shot into the fort. With one move, Burgoyne puts the Americans in an indefensible position. And without firing their cannon once, leave the outmaneuvered Americans no choice but to retreat. It is an easy win for Burgoyne and bolsters his belief that the campaign to take the Hudson River will be a simple one. News of the fall of Fort Ticonderoga reaches Paris, where Benjamin Franklin has been closely monitoring the war.
He's constantly waiting for his bail. I mean, none of our impatience for our mail could possibly equal what Franklin must have felt at that point. The ignorance is crippling.
But sometimes ignorance is bliss. That the undermanned American army has been forced to retreat in the face of an attack is the last thing Franklin wants to hear. On top of that, he has made little progress with King Louis XVI. Franklin is, after all, the representative of rebels. He is fraught with frustration.
There is nothing better to do here than drink. How can we fool ourselves that France might understand America better than Britain? How can we fool ourselves that a monarchy will help Republicans revolt against their monarch? Benjamin Franklin.
The fall of Fort Ty hits General Washington's desk with a thud. His soldiers lost it without so much as a fight. And now the British Army is on the move. 7,000 soldiers are heading down the Hudson. The rest are stationed in New York City. Washington flounders and begins moving his troops up and down the river, hedging his bet against where the Redcoats might attack next. General Washington may be conflicted, but so too are the British. Their commander, William Howe, has gathered up his 13,000 troops and set sail from New York City. Destination, unknown. Howe is torn. He is expected to move up the Hudson to aid Burgoyne, but he can't escape his own designs, a fixation on conquering Philadelphia, the rebel capital. His decision, when it comes, will change the course of the war. The mighty Fort Ticonderoga, the gateway to the Hudson River Valley, has fallen to the British without so much as a shot fired. It is another defeat for the undermanned Continental Army and is an ominous start to the summer of 1777. Across the ocean in France, Benjamin Franklin's waiting game continues. Franklin is biding his time, looking for news from America, some victory that would open the gates to Versailles, would convince the French to join the war. But he keeps his intentions to himself. It is a secrecy that breeds intrigue.
For the first year that he's there, there's a real question. Is he here because he's running away from the American Revolution? Is he here to undermine it, or is he here to underwrite it?
Desperate to find out more, both France and England surround Franklin with spies.
It turns out, in retrospect, that his own secretary was a spy, and that anything that crossed Franklin's desk was sent back within the week via a little bottle sunk beneath a tree in the Tuileries to the British government. And those dispatches arrived regularly 72 hours later. Because of the espionage, Franklin realized the only way he could keep a secret was to keep it to himself. And he's very, very closed-mouthed, plays his cards very close to the chest.
Franklin's silence is a calculated diplomatic strategy, akin to his favorite game, chess.
Life is a kind of chess in which we have points to gain and competitors to contend with. By playing at chess, we learn not to make our moves too hastily. Benjamin Franklin.
Franklin follows his own advice too well for some. But he knows the time will come when he finally gets to play his next move. Back across the ocean in America, British General Howe remains adrift off the coast of New York City. 13,000 soldiers on 260 ships still don't know where they are headed. John Burgoyne's plan calls for General Howe to head up the Hudson, yet Howe is intent on Philadelphia. Revenge for his embarrassing losses at Trenton and Princeton.
Howe is obsessed with holding Philadelphia and sustaining Philadelphia, situated almost exactly in the center of the 13 colonies geographically, because it's the political capital. It's where the Continental Congress resides. It's an important strategic center too, both commercially as well as politically.
Howe makes his decision. He will abandon Burgoyne, his Northern Army, and the Hudson Campaign. He will invade Philadelphia. In one move, he changes the course of the war. August 22nd, 1777, Hartsville, Pennsylvania. American scouts bring word to Washington that Howe's fleet has entered the Chesapeake Bay. Their target is now clear. They are headed for the rebel capital. Washington immediately sets his army in motion, marching south through Philadelphia. 3 days later, the British land at Elk Point, Maryland, and begin their northward march. The two armies are now on a collision course. September 11th, 1777, Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania. Washington positions his forces along the banks of a tributary called Brandywine Creek. It is here that he will make his stand against the advancing British. Brandywine Creek is the perfect place for a defense. There are only a few crossings along this stretch where troops can be transported from bank to bank, and Washington has them covered. By 7 a.m., the British reach the banks directly across the river from the main force of the Americans. Musket and artillery fire erupt between the two armies. 25,000 soldiers will clash on this day. The battle, intense and bloody. In the thick of the fighting, the Continental Army makes an alarming discovery. The weapons sent secretly by France months earlier have only now arrived, and many of them aren't working. Some of the muskets are fitted with the wrong cartridges. Others have shot of the wrong size. It renders them unusable. On the opposing side, the British are trying out a new and improved rifle. Captain Patrick Ferguson, a skilled marksman, is the inventor. The new weapon is lighter, has a longer range, and in Ferguson's expert hands is deadly accurate. During the fighting, the captain gets a high-ranking officer in his sights. But killing involves more than aim. On the 18th century field of battle, there is also the matter of honor.
The American Revolution occurs during what some historians term the age of limited warfare. These professional military officers, who deemed themselves professionals, did not think that it was gentlemanly nor honorable to intentionally lay low an enemy officer.
It's an easy shot, but Ferguson passes it up. His decision possibly changes history. The man at the end of his barrel was, evidence suggests, George Washington himself. 4 o'clock strikes on the field at Brandywine. The Continental Army has successfully held off the British advances for 8 hours. But all of that is about to change. What Washington doesn't know is that his main force has only been engaging half of Howe's army. The other half has been sent on a day-long march to the west, around the American defenses, and is now headed for a surprise attack from behind. It is the same tactic the British used at the Battle of Long Island, and once again, Washington is surprised by the maneuver. Having outflanked the Americans, the battle quickly becomes a rout. "1,000 American soldiers are wounded or killed. Washington is forced to retreat north, giving up the fight and giving up Philadelphia. Six weeks later, the news reaches America's emissary to France, Benjamin Franklin. His hometown, the rebel capital, Philadelphia, has fallen to the British. In response, the sage statesman makes an unlikely quip. Instead of Howe taking Philadelphia, Philadelphia has taken Howe.
This is not only spin of the finest kind, from a man who, remember, made his name writing hoaxes and dispensing misinformation in his own papers. He knows his job, and his job is essentially to make it appear to the Europeans, and particularly to the French, that the American cause is a viable one. And moreover, that the Americans can win this contest. Those are all of them, at that point, fictions.
Franklin, as shrewd in his diplomacy as he is in his chess, will have to wait yet again. The unanswered question is whether the French will support America in its next move.
Monsieur Franklin, in France, we do not take kings so. Madame de Bourbon, French Duchess.
Ah, madame, we do in America.
Back in the colonies, America's Northern Army is getting ready for a battle that will turn the tide of the war. September 11th, 1777. Washington's army takes on the British at Brandywine Creek. 25,000 soldiers clash, but the Americans are outflanked by their enemy. It is another rout for the British, as the rebel capital, Philadelphia, falls into enemy hands. But British General Howe's decision to take Philadelphia has meant abandoning his Northern Army. With no knowledge of Howe's choice, General John Burgoyne, leader of Britain's Northern Army, continues his campaign to take the Hudson. And the gentleman general makes sure he travels in style. 30 carts of food, clothing, and liquor take the edge off a campaign through the rugged terrain of upstate New York. Tonight, he is confident and in good cheer. Burgoyne has enlisted help in his campaign, a secret weapon that he believes will give him the upper hand. 500 Native Americans from the League of the Iroquois have joined Burgoyne's army. They will serve as guides to the British, helping them navigate the northern frontier.
The Indians were not really interested in theories of monarchy versus democracy. The Indians were playing it according to how is this going to play for us? Which side is going to be most likely to grant us our sovereignty? Who is our greatest friend, and conversely, who is our biggest threat?
Each Indian nation has to make a choice. Virtually none are able to remain neutral. Most, overwhelmingly, they side with the British.
For the Native Americans, it is a marriage of convenience. A British victory is their best hope for protecting their lands against the westward-pushing American colonists. Burgoyne partakes in the ancient practice of sharing a peace pipe, but he wants the Indians to attack the Americans without mercy, and wastes no time broadcasting his objective, issuing a proclamation to the inhabitants of New England, a warning to all who stand in his way.
I have but give stretch to the Indian forces under my direction, and they amount to thousands to overtake the hardened enemies of Great Britain wherever they may lurk. The messengers of justice and of wrath await them. General John Burgoyne.
Burgoyne's proclamation is a fateful decision. July 27, 1777, Western Vermont. Two braves capture a woman by the name of Jane McCrae. There is a struggle, a fight. A shot is fired. Jane McCrae dies, but it is unclear who killed her.
There are varying versions of this story, and some contend that in fact she was killed by militiamen firing on the Indians in an attempt to rescue her. However she actually met her fate, this is one of those sort of events that's prone to being manipulated for propaganda purposes.
The story spreads through the colonies with lightning speed and becomes fodder for brutal anti-Indian propaganda of the highest order. It is written that bloodthirsty Indians have killed a white woman, and Burgoyne is held accountable. Back in the British camp, the scalp of Jane McCrae is presented to Burgoyne, who receives it with disgust, even though he is the one who ordered the raids.
The savages, having scalped a young lady, their prisoner, fills me with horror. I would rather put my commission in the fire than serve a day if I could suppose government would blame me for such strong acts, such unheard barbarities.
But Burgoyne's reaction is too little, too late. The killing of McCrae becomes a call to arms. Militia grab their muskets and head to the Hudson Valley and begin to pour into Continental camps. For General Horatio Gates, who arrived on Washington's orders in August to take over as leader of America's Northern Army, it is the boost he has been waiting for. Gates is a proud, albeit disheveled man who comes from a clouded past. Born in Britain to a servant mother, he is rumored to be a bastard son. America has given him an escape from the rigid class structure of Europe. War, a chance to gain glory against his former home. But he harbors even greater ambitions.
Horatio Gates wanted to be commander-in-chief of the American Army. And it goes much beyond that. Whoever was the victorious leader of the revolutionaries would emerge as the leader of a new nation. There had to be a new ruler, some new kind of ruler. No one had decided what yet. I think he might have been that ambitious and that foolish.
Gates adds fuel to the furor over the killing of Jane McCrae, writing an open letter directly to his adversary.
That the famous Lieutenant General Burgoyne should hire the savages of America to scalp Europeans and the descendants of Europeans is more than will be believed in Europe.
They are harsh words to an old friend. Gates knows his rival John Burgoyne well. In the 7 Years' War, they were comrades in arms, registered one after the other in the British military ledger as gentleman to be lieutenant. Now Gates sees his chance for glory. In beating his old country and gentleman Johnny Burgoyne, he will prove himself to Congress, which, to him, still doesn't recognize his worth. Gates orders his army to a position where he knows the British will have to pass, just south of a region of New York called Saratoga. Gentleman Johnny Burgoyne continues his southward march, but there is no sign of reinforcements. Burgoyne has made a fateful decision to press forward rather than wait for news from Howe. clues as to what lies ahead are all around him. A royal patrol scouting close to Saratoga comes across a note pinned to a tree. Burgoyne had posted his proclamation. Now the rebels have issued one of their own. Thus far shalt thou go, and no further. September 19th, 1777. With numbers swelled by anti-Burgoyne sentiment, the rebel army is ready for a fight. Horatio Gates sees an opportunity to test the British just south of Saratoga on a piece of land called Freeman's Farm. Gates has a surprise for his enemy, an elite force sent by Washington himself, Daniel Morgan's riflemen. Morgan, a Virginia officer, fought in the 7 Years' War, witnessing firsthand the fighting style of the Native Americans. Inspired by what he saw, he has created guerrilla tactics that are new to the battlefields of the 18th century. Rather than attack in columns head-on, Morgan's men fire from cover. Noon. After a tough morning march through heavily thicketed woods, a forward picket of Burgoyne's army finally reaches a clearing. A moment to rest, they think. But Morgan's men are waiting. Fire rains down with deadly accuracy. All but one British officer is killed or wounded in the first assault. The ambush is followed by bloody skirmishes, the battle swinging back and forth through the afternoon. Until finally, at 4 o'clock, having inflicted their damage, the Americans fall back. The British suffer 600 casualties to the American marksmen, and come to understand that these rebels may not give up so easily. In the American camp, militia keep pouring in. The army swells to more than 10,000. Victory against the 5,000 British soldiers now seems possible. Horatio Gates can feel it. So too can another general who wants to capture some glory for himself, Benedict Arnold. But before the two generals take on Burgoyne, they will find themselves in a battle against each other, each vying for credit in a campaign that will change the course of the war. The battle at Freeman's Farm, just outside of Saratoga, New York, has stopped British General John Burgoyne's southward march in its tracks and given confidence to Horatio Gates' troops, whose numbers continue to swell. That confidence is shared by another bold American general who sees his chance for glory, Benedict Arnold. Arnold comes from a prominent Connecticut family that fell on hard times. His alcoholic father squandered away the family's fortune. But Arnold would not yield to his lowly circumstances, achieving great wealth and success in business through sheer will. He has been in the war since the outset and has always made an impression.
He was spit and polish. When he sat on a fine horse, he was literally a commanding figure. Men looked up to him.
It was Arnold who helped snatch Fort Ticonderoga from the British 2 years earlier. But the credit for the victory went to the hard-drinking frontiersman, Ethan Allen. It is a slight that Arnold has not forgotten. But this campaign offers him a chance at redemption, to get the credit he feels he deserves. Meanwhile, around Saratoga, New York, the two armies wait, just miles away from each other. They wait, as soldiers do, for their next order. In the American camp, Gates and Arnold talk strategy over a meal of ox heart. Their army has swelled to twice the size of Burgoyne's. The question is, what to do next? And the two generals have two different ideas. Arnold, ever on the offensive, proposes an aggressive act, an attack on Burgoyne. Gates, however, is characteristically circumspect. Let Burgoyne come to them. The conversation turns heated, tempers flare.
Horatio Gates couldn't stand Benedict Arnold, considered him an upstart, an arrogant upstart. And Benedict Arnold, like many of the revolutionary soldiers, called Gates Granny Gates, a fussy old woman.
But the headstrong Arnold takes his argument one step too far. Gates, in no uncertain terms, reminds Arnold that it is he who is the ranking officer.
And Gates banished his best general from the dinner table, insulted him, wouldn't let him come to meetings, told him basically stay in your quarters, which were a little hut on the edge of the battlefield. And Benedict Arnold fumed as a result of that dinner and decided that he would have to defy the orders of his commanding officer because he believed the Americans were going to be beaten if it were up to Granny Gates.
In the British camp, General John Burgoyne is filled with frustration. News has finally arrived from Howe. There will be no reinforcements coming from the south. But Gentleman Johnny Burgoyne refuses to retreat.
Burgoyne is exceptionally ambitious. He is definitely a glory hunter. But his greatest failing was that, like many officers of his time, he placed a premium on individual martial glory. He wanted to gain fame for himself. Saratoga should have never happened. Johnny Burgoyne's pride, his hubris, is what precipitated the disaster at Saratoga.
With his supplies dwindling, Burgoyne decides to make one last push. An assault on the Americans just to the south of Saratoga on a rise of land called Bemis Heights. October 7th, 1777. Burgoyne sends a reconnaissance force of 1,500 towards the American lines. Gates sets 2,400 of his men out to meet the British. It is the final engagement of the Battle of Saratoga. On the field, Benedict Arnold, in defiance of Gates' orders, leads the charge against the Royals.
Arnold employed snipers. He got riflemen, highly accurate, put them up in trees like snipers, not down in red uniforms with white stripes that you could sight. Arnold fought like an Indian, from cover with camouflage, surprise attacks. It was a new kind of warfare, and the British didn't adapt to it.
Through the smoke of battle, Arnold spots an opportunity he can't ignore. British General Simon Fraser seems to be single-handedly rallying the troops. Arnold makes a snap decision that changes the course of the fight. He orders his men to target the British officer. 1 month earlier, George Washington may have been spared assassination at the Battle of Brandywine. But at Saratoga, British officers are offered no such favor. It takes 3 shots that take down his adversary. With Fraser removed from the battle, the life seems to disappear from the British soldiers, who begin to retreat under the pressure of Arnold's advance. But not before taking a well-placed shot of their own. Benedict Arnold takes a bullet to the leg and barely survives being crushed by his horse.
When the battle was over, his second-in-command said, "Sir, where are you hit?" And Arnold said, "It's my leg. I wish it had been my heart." And I do too. I wish it had been his heart, because if he had died at that moment, he would have been the great hero of the Revolution.
With Arnold's leadership, the British attack is repelled and the campaign to take the Hudson comes to an end. Yet it is Horatio Gates who will take the credit for the victory.
Gates doesn't mention Arnold in his dispatches and garners all the glory for himself. The people and the press hail Gates as the new American hero. In fact, the hero of the battle was Benedict Arnold.
October 17th, 1777, noon. Two generals meet each other on a field of surrender. After a 7-month campaign down the Hudson, General John Burgoyne comes face to face with his old colleague, Continental General Horatio Gates. Burgoyne's ill-fated journey ends here with the surrender of 6,000 of his soldiers, the largest capture of British forces in the entire war. Burgoyne will return home a prisoner of war, losing not only his year-old wager, but his military career. General William Howe, who delivered Philadelphia to the British with the best of intentions, has had enough. No one in Britain is celebrating the capture of Philadelphia. Instead, they blame Howe for not coming to Burgoyne's aid. Just 5 days after the surrender at Saratoga, Howe prepares his resignation to return home, leaving behind the rebels and the war that should have ended long ago. Across the Atlantic, America's envoy to France, Benjamin Franklin, receives the news. The victory at Saratoga has changed the war and changed the world.
I don't think anyone was as surprised by the news of Saratoga as Franklin. There had been nothing but bad news from the colonies. It's fair to say certainly that he is waiting for something like this. Saratoga is certainly the thing which finally puts him in a position to be able to sign the deal with the French.
Benjamin Franklin has played his game perfectly. Now, the next move is his. He dons his old blue velvet suit, the same one he wore 3 years ago on the fateful day the British ministry all but accused him of treason. He wears it again, at last, to Versailles and a meeting with the French leadership. The news of victory at Saratoga is exactly what France's King Louis XVI wants to hear. He pledges his army, and more importantly, his navy, to the American cause. It amounts to a declaration of war between France and England. The American Revolution, which started as a far-off colonial uprising, is now a world war. They might be celebrating in Paris, but as the winter of 1777 takes hold, General Washington has less to be joyous about. Horatio Gates's anointment as the hero of Saratoga again raises questions over who should be in charge of this army. Philadelphia, New York, and large parts of the colonies remain in British hands. Washington must turn his army and his leadership around, for the biggest battles still lie ahead. December 17th, 1777, White Marsh, Pennsylvania. A battered Continental Army, or what remains of it, marches north through the driving snow in search of winter quarters. The year's campaigns have taken a heavy toll on the soldiers. Their clothes are tattered, their spirits down. The Commander-in-Chief, George Washington, is feeling the strain as well. 3 months earlier, another American general, Horatio Gates, catapulted himself onto the national scene by defeating the British at Saratoga, New York. The victory has given America a new war hero, one with boundless ambition.
Horatio Gates wanted to be commander-in-chief of the American Army. And it goes much beyond that. Whoever was the victorious leader of the revolutionaries would emerge as the leader of a new nation.
At the same time that Horatio Gates's stock is on the rise, Washington's is in free fall. At Brandywine, Pennsylvania, the Americans fought the largest engagement of the war so far, and Washington suffered one of his worst losses. 1,000 American soldiers are wounded or killed, and Washington is forced to retreat north into New Jersey. The victory at Brandywine gives the British the prize they were after, the rebel capital, Philadelphia. Independence Hall, the seat of rebel power, now sits empty, a burning reminder of Washington's failures. America's rebel Congress is now a body in exile and have set up a new home 100 miles to the west of Philadelphia in York, Pennsylvania. In the chamber, there are murmurings that George Washington is weak-willed, that the general's poor judgment keeps the Americans from defeating the British.
The expectations that civilian leaders had, that Howe's army could be conquered just like that. There were doubters and carping and criticism and Monday morning quarterbacking against what he had done.
Revolutionaries like Samuel Adams are calling the abilities of their commander-in-chief into question.
Our troops are victorious in the north. The enemy troops are divided and scattered over a country several hundred miles. If we do not beat them this fall, will not the faithful historian record it as our own fault? Samuel Adams.
Congress takes action and names Horatio Gates to head the newly created Board of War, a position that gives him a say in American military strategy.
This is the low point of George Washington's professional life. Congress begins to lose confidence in him. Gates' followers are pumping up Gates, and the idea is then broached that Gates ought to be the commander-in-chief. But now, Washington, knowing that he's seen as weak, must win big soon to solidify that command.
But the Continental Army is in no shape for a fight. And in 18th century warfare, winter is the time to rest, to train, to resupply. For Washington, now is the time to rebuild his army and his reputation, and do it before the winter is over. It will be an uphill battle at the soon-to-be-storied Valley Forge. It is a strategic location, just 23 miles north of Philadelphia. Valley Forge is an ideal place from which to keep a close eye on the movements of the British Army and stop the enemy from pillaging the fertile countryside. Sitting on a plateau, the camp is easily defensible. Creeks and the Schuylkill River provide a natural fortification to the camp. But building and running a city a third the size of Philadelphia is a mammoth undertaking. Washington throws himself into the work. He designs the camp himself, down to the last detail. The layout of the barracks, the placement of roads, the location of its defenses. Washington enacts strict rules to fight typhus and dysentery. Soldiers who do not use proper privies face 5 lashes to be administered on the spot. Soldiers who contract venereal disease from prostitutes selling their services on the peripheries of the camp pay for their own treatment, $4 for the rank and file and $10 for the officers. These seemingly mundane tasks consume all of Washington's time.
We might accuse him of being a micromanager, but in fact this was a situation that needed micromanaging. He has to really pay attention to the minutiae because it's the minutiae that's going to kill off his army. Dysentery and other camp diseases are going to create havoc in his camp unless matters of sanitation are attended to carefully. So he has to pay close attention to the details, and he does it really well.
Washington's hands-on approach wins the admiration of his soldiers. and he assures the men that he himself will share in every hardship and partake in every inconvenience. During the first month of construction at Valley Forge, Washington chooses to live in a tent at the edge of the camp, alongside his army. Life in Philadelphia, however, stands in stark contrast. For the British, the winter break from the war brings a return to the creature comforts that status affords.
The British Army is very warm and comfortable wherever they want to be, whether it's New York or Philadelphia. They have no problems. Their problem is deciding which tavern to drink at night.
The British may have lost at Saratoga, but they hold the rebel capital and are savoring it for all it is worth. Evenings are filled by social gatherings, and each Thursday there is a ball where Philadelphia's high society loyalists mingle with the British officer class. Back at Valley Forge, the temperature hovers around freezing, and many of the soldiers are forced to wrap their feet in rags for lack of shoes. But the men make do, fighting off the cold by playing cards, mending their clothes, and learning new drills. For soldiers like Joseph Hodgkins, a 34-year-old cobbler from Massachusetts, letters from home are a bittersweet reminder of what has been left behind.
My dear, I have looked for you till I know not how to look any longer. Monday afternoon I was very low in spirits, almost despair of your coming home. Brother Perkins and sister send their love to you. Your most affectionate companion till death, Sarah.
As the winter grinds on at Valley Forge, supply shortages become a problem. America has never had to feed and clothe an army. During the 7 Years' War, just a fraction of the soldiers' food came from the colonies. All the rest was shipped across the ocean from England. And since the outset of the war, the congressionally controlled provisioning offices have struggled mightily to supply the army.
Supplying the Continental Army was immensely complex. We call it the Continental Army, thinking of it as a national permanent army, a regular army, which it was. But in many ways, it's still organized and paid for locally. Each state was responsible for supplying its own troops, and this creates enormous confusion.
In February, the Army supply lines grind to a halt. The staple diet for the soldiers becomes fire cakes, a meager meal made of flour mixed with water into an unappetizing paste that is cooked over an open fire. It is a far cry from the promised daily ration of a pound of beef and a pound of bread. Washington is all too aware of the hardships faced by his soldiers. With his army facing starvation, he throws himself into a writing frenzy, petitioning the states for more food and clothing, pleading to Congress for more power to oversee the supply offices, and imploring local officials to send more aid. But for all his efforts, relief is slow in coming. Washington will need help to turn his army back into a fighting force, and it will come from a most unlikely source. A new arrival in camp, a Prussian who goes by the name of Frederick William Augustus Heinrich Ferdinand, Baron von Steuben. February 1778. The winter at Valley Forge is taking a heavy toll on the Continental Army. 2,500 soldiers die from disease, more than have been killed in battle in the entire war. Thousands of others are incapacitated by sickness and hunger. Washington has done his best to hold his army together, but is still under pressure from Congress to mount a successful spring campaign and take back Philadelphia from the British. But to achieve that goal, he will have to enlist the help of others. On February 17th, a new recruit arrives in camp, sent by the American Congress to aid in the cause. He calls himself Frederick William Augustus Heinrich Ferdinand, Baron von Steuben, and wears the bejeweled cross of the Order of de la Fidélité, denoting an honorary knighthood from Prussia. Von Steuben carries letters of introduction, but no papers confirming his achievements, an omission that should be a clue, for the Baron is stretching his story, just as he's stretched his name. He has never risen higher than the rank of captain, and he has been turned down for service by the French, Spanish, and German armies. Amidst rumors, he has taken familiarities with young boys, which the law forbids and severely punishes. In short, von Steuben has come to the only army in the world that will have him, the Americans. The Baron's past may be shrouded in mystery, but Washington is desperate for leadership, for officers with European training. He puts von Steuben right to work. The task, to create a single method of training, a critical step towards a more professional army, and to do it before the winter is over. Von Steuben embraces the opportunity. The Baron starts small, spending hours each day working directly with a model unit that will be used to train the rest of the army.
Baron von Steuben is a remarkable figure. Von Steuben's genius was the ability to distill the complexity of state-of-the-art European drill tactics into a digestible form to this raw material that was the American soldier.
They are tactics that are new to Washington and his army, tactics learned during the Baron's service in the Prussian army. But he makes an important adjustment in the way he teaches them.
Von Steuben recognized that he was not dealing with Prussian conscripts. He recognized the individuality and the Republican notions of the population of troops that he dealt with, and he was able to take principles and tactics and give them to this force in such a manner that they were willing to receive it and that they were able to transform themselves from virtuous Republicans into soldiers in a professional army.
Under von Steuben's tutelage, the soldiers learn how to form solid, orderly columns, how to properly load and fire a weapon in formation, and the proper use of a bayonet.
The army that comes out of Valley Forge is in many ways much more sophisticated one than the one that goes in there. Von Steuben brings a new level of professionalism to the army, and that by itself creates its own sense of professionalism. It creates its own sense of belonging. They're belonging to something larger than themselves.
In a matter of weeks, the ragtag unit is marching in lockstep. Soon, every soldier is taught the von Steuben technique. It becomes the foundation for the Army's first training manual. Washington's army is slowly remade. It is nearly battle ready. In March, spring finally comes to Valley Forge. The dark months of winter begin to fade away. Yet food shortages have been a recurring problem. For the young General Nathaniel Greene, watching his army go hungry is more than he can bear. At 35, the formidable Greene is a rising star in the Army, even though he is an unlikely soldier. Born in Rhode Island, Greene is a successful merchant from a devout Quaker family that loathes war. But he is ambitious and fiercely loyal. When war breaks out, he throws himself behind the Patriot cause. Greene becomes the youngest brigadier general in the Continental Army at age 33. Now he has risen to the rank of Major General and is one of Washington's closest confidants and one of the loudest critics of the Army's failed supply departments.
The Quartermaster General, Commissary General, and Clothier General departments are in such a wretched condition that unless there are some very good alterations in those departments, it will be impossible to prosecute another campaign. Our troops are naked, and the men getting sickly in their huts. Nathaniel Greene.
Greene's experience as a merchant leads him to take matters into his own hands. He leads foraging parties into the Pennsylvania countryside to round up food and supplies. But the citizens are often unwilling to give up their property, even to an army fighting for their independence. It creates a precarious situation.
Washington didn't want to alienate the local civilian population. He did what he could to supply the army, but he wants to protect that relationship with the local community.
But desperate times call for desperate measures. When persuasion fails, livestock and grain are occasionally taken at the end of a musket. Greene leaves the scared civilians with the only reimbursement his army is offering, the promise of future payment, an IOU. Greene's efforts impress Washington, who puts him in charge of acquiring supplies for the army. The duty-bound general accepts his assignment as quartermaster, but it is certainly not the commission that he had hoped for.
Nobody ever heard of a quartermaster in history. All of you will be immortalizing yourselves in the golden pages of history, while I am confined to a series of drudgeries to pave the way for it. Nathaniel Greene.
This is the classic case of a successful general being called back to the Pentagon to be a bureaucrat. And Greene doesn't want that. But on the other hand, it's a sense of Puritan guilt. It's a sense of sacrificing what's good for you, what's good for your country.
Greene dispatches foraging parties far and wide, south into Virginia, to the eastern shore of Maryland, and north into New Jersey, rebuilding the supply lines for the army. The efforts of Baron von Steuben and Greene over the winter at Valley Forge have given Washington confidence that he has an army that is now ready to take the fight to the British. Meanwhile, an ocean away, a bold American is pushing the war to a new and unlikely front, the shores of England itself. April 1778. The long winter at Valley Forge has finally come to an end. The Continental Army continues to train in preparation for the summer campaign, one that Washington hopes will bring a much-needed military victory and vindication for his previous losses. But the fighting season is still months away. For now, all the general can do is ready his troops. Unbeknownst to Washington, though, the war for independence is spreading to a new and unexpected front, across the ocean. On a chilly spring morning, a lone American ship, the Ranger, cuts through the water off the coast of England. Their target, the port towns along the western coast of Britain. It has been 700 years since anyone has raided these shores. 700 years since a foreigner has rained terror on the inhabitants of the British mainland. The architect of this bold plan, John Paul Jones. At first sight, the 31-year-old Jones is an unlikely captain. He is short in stature and soft in his speech. But the Scottish-born Jones is already a veteran sailor.
Jones is a proud man. He's a very handsome man, almost beautiful to look at. He's wearing a British naval uniform. Now you may wonder, why would an American naval officer wear a British Navy uniform? Because he thought it was better looking.
Jones is the son of a gardener who set out for the open sea at the age of 13 to make a name for himself working on merchant and slave ships.
Jones casts himself in his own play, and it's a play of upward mobility. This is a notion that's very 20th century, but in the 18th century, it was unusual. In the 18th century, your place in society is defined. That's not the way John Paul Jones wants to see the world. He wants to be a rising figure. He wants to overcome his modest origins and become a gentleman.
It takes him just 8 years to reach the rank of captain. But shipboard life is a dangerous business. and at 28 he is forced to flee to Virginia to escape charges of murdering a mutinous crew member. He starts life anew in America, adding the last name Jones to avoid being found, and joins the fledgling Continental Navy in 1775. But what America calls a navy is little more than an awkward flotilla of mismatched merchant ships, clumsily converted for battle. A fighting force that could never stand up to the superior power of the British Navy. So the ambitious Jones sets out on his own course.
Jones is a military genius, and he has a fundamental insight, which is that we're never going to beat the British by playing some defensive game. The British Navy at this time has more than 100 men of war. The American Navy has none. So they're not going to win some massed naval battle. They have to go guerrilla.
John Paul Jones returns to the waters of his youth and in surprise attacks shocks the enemy. Raiding British merchant ships along the Irish coast, burning supply ships along the west coast of Britain, and leading an attack on the port of Whitehaven, the very town Jones set sail from as a young boy.
The idea is to terrorize the British people, to show them that the cost of suppressing the American Revolution is going to be high, to take the fight home to the Brits.
It is a strategy that has an immediate effect. News of the raids hits London like a thunderclap.
This morning, an express arrived with alarming intelligence that an American privateer had appeared off the coast and proceeded to Selkirk House, which they pillaged.
Along the northwest coast of England, a general intimidation discovers itself on every appearance of a sail.
But for his tactics, raiding towns and taking merchant ships, Jones becomes known as the Pirate Jones. It is a label that plagues him.
John Paul Jones wants to be seen as an officer and a gentleman, not as a pirate, and it hurts him.
In an attempt to prove that he is more than just a pirate, Jones sets his eye on one last goal: taking a British warship. He finds the perfect target anchored off the Irish coast, the Drake. With 20 guns, all 4-pounders, she is a relatively even match to Jones's Ranger. As is his custom, Jones flies the British naval ensign, which allows him to slide close to the enemy ship. And at the last minute, Jones gives the order to fire. The battle is on. The two ships exchange broadsides at close range.
18th century warfare was supposed to be gentlemanly, at least for the gentlemen who fought it. It was almost like a formal dance. At sea, ships, like a minuet and a ball. Jones didn't believe in all that. Jones believed in what today we would call total war. He would put men up in the tops, as they were called, and up the mast on these platforms to blaze away with muskets, with guns.
These new tactics give Jones the upper hand. His crew rakes the deck of the Drake with hot grape shot that tears through sails and limbs. And after just 1 hour, the British lower their flag in defeat.
Its significance is that no American ship has taken a British ship in a clean, fair fight. And the British Navy considers itself to be so superior to any other navy. So for an American ship to defeat a British ship was a real blow to the Brits, and it told them, what are we getting into here?
The Ranger makes a hasty retreat, heading to France, the British Navy in desperate pursuit. For Jones, the mission is a success.
What was done is sufficient to show that not all their boasted navy can protect their own coasts, and that the scenes of distress, which they have occasioned in America, may soon be brought home to their own doors. John Paul Jones.
Jones has brought the revolution right to the doorstep of the British. Arriving in France, he becomes the toast of Paris, the ideal of American heroism. Jones's war will continue. The following year, he will lead a modest fleet aboard his new ship, the Bonhomme Richard, winning the greatest American naval battle of the time against the British warship, the Serapis. And years later, for his daring missions, John Paul Jones will become known as the father of the American Navy. Back in America, George Washington prepares to take the fight to the British Army, looking for the battle that will restore his reputation once and for all. May 5th, 1778, Valley Forge. 3 months of drilling have given Washington a new confidence in his army. The efforts of Washington, Nathaniel Greene, and Baron von Steuben, whose service has now earned him the position of Inspector General of the Army, have emboldened a force that is now 13,000 strong. Washington's perseverance through the hardship of the winter has held his army together. He is now eager to test the mettle of his soldiers, and the British are about to provide the perfect opportunity. British headquarters, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. A new commander-in-chief is taking over the British Army, Sir Henry Clinton. His predecessor, William Howe, recalled after the British loss at Saratoga. Clinton arrived in America in 1775 with Howe and General John Burgoyne. Both generals left America in defeat. Now, he is the last one standing.
At the time of the American Revolution, positions of command devolved to the next man in the line according to seniority. Promotion was subject, with very few exceptions, to the rigid law of seniority. And in this case, Henry Clinton was the only choice because he was the next most senior officer following the recall of Howe.
Clinton is as concerned with how his actions will be interpreted, how he will be judged, that awareness of, if I don't handle this right, what's this going to mean for my reputation back at home?
Clinton has good reason to worry about his reputation. The war for independence has changed dramatically. It is no longer a battle between two adversaries. Now there are three. For the past year, the Americans have been courting France, the world's other superpower. Leading the effort is the rebel emissary, Benjamin Franklin. At 72 years old, Franklin is an internationally renowned scientist and writer who has entered a new phase in his career, that of diplomat. America's victory at Saratoga has shown the French that the colonies can hold their own against the British and has persuaded them to join the fight against their ancient enemy. Now the elder statesman is working out the final details in the newly signed Treaty of Friendship. France gives money and supplies, but more importantly, offers their navy to the American cause.
French naval support is absolutely crucial for American resistance. The British, they have to now take the naval dimensions of this war into account. They can no longer say we can take naval supremacy for granted and concentrate on winning the war on land.
Back in Philadelphia, British General Clinton opens his first orders, which have just arrived from England. The British ministry has been forced to make a dramatic choice. In May 1778, the British hold Philadelphia, New York City, and Newport, Rhode Island. Now there is a very real danger of a blockade by the French fleet at any of these ports. So Clinton is ordered to give up the rebel capital of Philadelphia and consolidate his forces in New York City. It is a forced retreat. Not how Clinton had expected his leadership to begin. American spies in Philadelphia rushed dispatches to Valley Forge with word of the British action. The news finds Washington and his generals discussing battle plans for the upcoming summer. Now the question on the table is whether to move on the British when they begin their retreat to New York. Washington is still stinging from last year's losses at Brandywine and Germantown and is eager for a fight. But before he can take on the enemy, Washington has to take on one of his most talented generals and one of the most outspoken challengers to his authority, General Charles Lee. The British-born Lee is an eccentric but capable officer and a brilliant military tactician. But in December of 1776, as he was supposed to be on his way to aid Washington as the Americans fled New York, Lee was instead captured by the British while he lounged in his nightclothes at a tavern. Despite the blunder, Washington worked hard to get the experienced Lee back from the British in a prisoner exchange.
Lee is arguably the most qualified general officer in the American Army in a strictly military sense. He fought in the French and Indian War, he fought in continental Europe during the 7 Years' War, he fought from Russia to Poland. He's exceptionally experienced, but this experience breeds some hubris. He thinks that he knows better.
Lee seemed to have an agenda throughout the war of really carving out an independent command for himself, and one could speculate that he probably would have liked to supplant Washington as the commander-in-chief.
Lee's arrogance has always been an issue, and he questions Washington's plans at every turn. But today he takes his argument one step further, suggesting that the American force would never stand a chance fighting the Royals head-on. Coming from someone who spent more than a year in British captivity, Lee's stance raises questions about his loyalty.
There was always an aura of suspicion around him, in Washington's mind at least. Part of the reason I'm very suspicious of Lee is he wasn't treated as a prisoner. He had dinner with the other officers. He had a convivial life with them. It was not the kind of treatment that was given to other revolutionaries when they were captured.
What none of the Americans knew at the time is that while in captivity, Lee had offered advice to the British as to how to beat the Americans and bring the conflict to an end. An act of treason that would color Lee's actions for the rest of the war. June 20th, 1778, Mount Holly, New Jersey. The main force of the British Army, 11,000 soldiers, have begun their withdrawal from Philadelphia to New York with a supply train that stretches more than 12 miles. Washington sees the British as vulnerable and wants to bring on a fight against the advice of his generals, including Saratoga's victor, Horatio Gates. But Gates, now stationed in Albany, New York, has become obsessed with a major campaign into Canada, an offensive that Washington calls the child of folly. Even supporters in Congress view the idea as impractical because it would split the American army in two. Gates's plan is rejected, and the American army, 13,000 strong, breaks camp at Valley Forge and sets off after the British. For more than a week, the two armies march across New Jersey, covering 90 miles in a searing June heat. American detachments ahead of the British fell trees, destroy bridges, and engage in skirmishes, slowing the British Army's progress. Until finally, Washington sees his opportunity for a full engagement. On the night of June 24th, Washington lays out his battle plan. At the crossroads of Monmouth Courthouse, an advance corps of 5,000 soldiers will move forward and engage the rear of the British Army as they prepare to get underway. Washington, with 7,000 soldiers, will hang behind the advance force. If the British retreat, the Americans will let them go. But if they engage, Washington will move forward and join the fight. In accordance with military etiquette, Washington's senior officer, General Charles Lee, is offered command of the advance force.
Lee claims the right to lead the attack because he's inexperienced, second in command.
Lee didn't turn it down. He took it, which was unfortunate, because Washington had to let him go ahead of the rest of his army.
On June 27th, Washington issues the order. Lee will attack the next morning. The British Army has been retreating across New Jersey for more than a week. And against the wishes of his generals, George Washington has set his army out in pursuit, seeking an opportunity to bring on a full engagement. Finally, at a crossroads called Monmouth Courthouse, the Continental Army catches up with the British. June 28, 1778. A devastating heat has engulfed the parched fields of eastern New Jersey. In the morning, General Charles Lee's men set off towards the British rear guard at Monmouth. Washington and 7,000 soldiers wait 7 miles behind Lee's troops. The general waits anxiously for word of the offensive, but so far, there has been none.
His army has been trained and turned into a new and hard-fighting army, and that army and its commander are now convinced that they can beat any army on the face of the earth, and they are eager for the fight. And that fight comes on one of the hottest days of the war. Different records show that the heat was somewhere between 100 and 104 degrees on the morning of the battle.
At noon, the first progress reports come in from Continental soldiers that appear to be in retreat. The news is unbelievable.
Lee was not attacking. What was going on here? He had the strength, he had the trained men who knew how to maneuver now. Then all of a sudden he began to retreat when he should have attacked.
In fact, Lee had no battle plan. Nothing. He was hopeful of victory somehow. It's obvious to all the men at Monmouth that there is no plan. The men retreat.
Furious, Washington rides ahead and encounters General Lee himself.
Washington personally rode up and took over and relieved Lee of his command. Nobody accurately knows what Washington said because it was almost sacrilegious to write down when George Washington swore. And whatever he called Lee, it was enough for Lee to get the idea and to get out of there.
With Lee reprimanded, Washington turns his attention to a more urgent matter: the British Army, which is fast approaching. But for the British soldiers, marching in 100-degree heat in their full wool uniforms, it is an exhausting advance.
We proceeded 5 miles in a road composed of nothing but sand, which scorched through our shoes with intolerable heat. The sun beating on our head with a force scarcely to be conceived in Europe, and not a drop of water to assuage our parching thirst. A number of soldiers were unable to support the fatigue and died on the spot. Lieutenant William Hale.
At 1 o'clock, less than half a mile separates the British Army from the Americans. Washington must act fast, rallying the troops on the high ground of the field. Within an hour, the American soldiers have formed their ranks. The British arrive, hot and exhausted from their march, only to face a Continental Army in a strong defensive position. The winter's training at Valley Forge is paying off, and Washington knows it.
He then does something astounding. He rides back and forth in front of his lines to rally the troops, putting himself in the line of fire, risking his life as he asked his own men to risk their lives. People who know Washington in the war think that he has a feeling of invincibility because he puts himself in the line of fire so often. He's almost convinced that he can't be killed. The British open up on him and miraculously miss him.
The Battle of Monmouth erupts. More than 20,000 soldiers clash in the brutal heat. The fighting rages for hours, long into the summer afternoon. For the men on the field that day, it is some of the most intense combat they have ever seen.
The briskest cannonade commenced on both sides that I ever heard. If anything can be called musical when there is so much danger, I think it was the finest music I ever heard. Henry Dearborn.
The English commander to the right hollered, "Come on, my brave boys, for the honor of Great Britain," and killed many with their bayonets. British Lieutenant Alexander Dow.
The shattered remains of our battalion suffered from thirst and heat, of which several died. Some preferred the shade of the trees in the direct range of shot to the more horrid tortures of thirst. One of these had his arm shattered to pieces. Lieutenant Hale.
The British advance repeatedly, but Washington's men repel each of the assaults. In the thick of the fighting, a young woman named Mary Hayes Macaulay risks her life caring for the wounded and bringing water to the parched American troops. She is just one of the scores of women who take to the battlefields of the Revolution and become known to the soldiers as Molly Pitcher. The Battle of Monmouth is the longest of the Revolutionary War, lasting continuously more than 5 hours. Sunstroke, not musket balls, is the biggest killer on this day. Scores of soldiers on both sides die from the heat.
When the smoke had cleared at Monmouth, it was a draw. Washington knew and the country knew that this new army that had come out of Valley Forge was a good one. They had held their own against the British. This renews the public's spirit for the war and forever solidifies Washington's position as the unquestioned commander-in-chief.
The Continental Army has proven itself a capable fighting force. And Washington has proven his leadership as their general. For his retreat in the face of the enemy, Charles Lee will face court-martial. He will be wounded in one duel and challenged to 7 others for suggesting that the Americans could not stand up to the British. Disgraced, he will retire to his Virginia home and die there with his beloved dogs in 1782. The rebel capital, Philadelphia, is now back in American hands, and Washington turns control of the city over to one of his most trusted generals, Benedict Arnold. The bold general is now a military governor and will make choices here that will forever change his past, his present, and his future. On the field that evening at Monmouth Courthouse, the entire army lay together in exhaustion, and Washington sleeps here on the battlefield with his men. The French Navy is now under sail. Destination, America. Just maybe, the war can be won before the year is out. July 4th, 1778. It is the second anniversary of the Declaration of Independence and the second birthday for what will become a new nation, the United States of America. For the soldiers, a day of celebration. And for their leader, General George Washington, a time of renewed confidence. It has been a week since the Continentals took on the British Army at the New Jersey crossroads of Monmouth Courthouse. It was one of the hottest days of the war, and the Americans, fresh from a winter's worth of training at Valley Forge, stood up to the full force of the British. More than 20,000 soldiers clashed on the field. The battle raged for hours in the stifling afternoon heat. But the Continentals held their ground.
Washington knew and the country knew that this new army was a good one. They had held their own against the British. This renews the public's spirit for the war and solidifies Washington's position as the unquestioned commander-in-chief.
After the battle, the British withdraw to their stronghold in New York City, giving Washington hope for a brighter future in the war. The British pullout means the rebel capital, Philadelphia, has returned to American hands. And in the main chamber of Independence Hall, the Continental Congress is back in session. Across town at City Tavern, a crowd is gathering for an Independence Day celebration. The July 4th celebration is a who's who of Philadelphia's high society. Congressmen, statesmen, and wealthy merchants are all in attendance. Also at the gathering is one of the most revered generals of the Revolution, the man personally installed by George Washington as Philadelphia's military governor, Benedict Arnold. Arnold was born into a prominent Connecticut family, but his alcoholic father squandered the family's fortune. Determined to overcome his lowly circumstances, he has become a celebrated war hero through sheer will. In 1775, Arnold helped lead a daring mission to snatch the remote outpost, Fort Ticonderoga, from the British. But the credit for the victory went to the bold frontiersman Ethan Allen, a cruel blow to Arnold's honor. 2 years later, it was Benedict Arnold who rallied the Americans to victory in the Battle of Saratoga, but at a high price. Arnold took a bullet to the leg and barely survived being crushed by his horse.
When the battle was over, his second-in-command said, "Sir, where are you hit?" And Arnold said, "It's my leg. I wish it had been my heart." And I do too. I wish it had been in his heart, because if he had died at that moment, he would have been the great hero of the Revolution.
Adding insult to injury, literally, credit for the victory went to Horatio Gates, the leader of America's Northern Army. It is another in a growing list of slights against Arnold.
Gates doesn't mention Arnold in his dispatches and garners all the glory for himself. The people and the press hail Gates as the new American hero. In fact, the hero of the battle was Benedict Arnold.
Now, crippled by the injury from Saratoga, Arnold has had to relinquish his battlefield command for a new charge from George Washington: to restore order to Philadelphia, a city still reeling from the 8-month occupation by the British.
Philadelphia under the British was a place of terrible suffering for the poor who couldn't afford to buy any food or fuel. It was a place where dozens of American prisoners of war died every day. The houses were in shambles. There was nothing to eat. There were people begging in the streets.
The British occupation has helped radicalize the city. Mobs take to the streets for public demonstrations, where prostitutes dressed as loyalists are paraded around town, a display of hatred towards any who sympathize with the British. And in heated backroom debates, both the state and continental governments are seeking to reassert their political power over Philadelphia. It creates a precarious situation, one that the headstrong general is ill-equipped to handle.
Benedict Arnold has something of a prickly personality. He is not the kind of person that an acquaintance would probably go out of the way to compliment to other people. He is vain, he's somewhat self-serving, he's somewhat self-interesting, and those that don't already like him are not inclined to do him any favors.
In addition, with his haughty manner and fancy dress, Arnold looks to many just like a Tory, a loyalist. Around town, Arnold and his expensively dressed friends wear the wigs and fineries associated with the British. But it is Arnold's actions as military governor that cause a stir.
Arnold's first act was to close all the stores. He said to take an inventory of what there was available to supply the army and the civilians. But immediately the accusations began to fly that he was cornering the market on goods that he was going to sell himself. I don't think Benedict Arnold was doing anything as a commanding officer in Philadelphia that many of the other generals on both sides did as a matter of custom. Officers got a percentage, commissary generals got a commission, and he was only doing what others did.
Arnold does little to help his cause by regularly entertaining suspected loyalists. There is one in particular who catches his eye. A younger lady, demure, quiet, intense. Lovelier than the rest, Peggy Shippen. At 18, Peggy is half Arnold's age and is the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in Philadelphia, the judge and merchant Edward Shippen. The Shippens tried to maintain their neutrality under the British occupation, but are strongly suspected of being loyalists. Like many of Philadelphia's society women, Peggy kept company with British officers over the winter of 1778. One of her closest companions was British General Clinton's ambitious aide-de-camp, a young man by the name of Major John Andre. Shippen's friendship with Andre has not ended with the withdrawal from Philadelphia. Through her friends, she still hears from the British officer. It is a relationship that ties her dangerously close to the enemy. Arnold is taken with the young Shippen and begins an intense courtship that captures her heart and culminates with their marriage.
Peggy Shippen, from the time she was about 5, had heard about Benedict Arnold. The newspapers were always full of his exploits. She was a gorgeous young woman. She was extremely well-educated by her father, self-educated as well, could run a business which appealed to a Yankee merchant like Arnold. Today they would be considered a dynamite couple, and I think they saw themselves in that term right away.
But they are also a couple under scrutiny. For his extravagant parties and questionable business dealings, Arnold comes under fire in the press. They are deadly serious charges, corruption, abuse of power, leveled by an anonymous source. Once again, Arnold faces a slight against his honor. But this time, his integrity is called into question. It is an attack that may push him too far. Summer, 1778. The Continental Army has proven its mettle at the Battle of Monmouth, a battle that has solidified George Washington's position as the American commander-in-chief. The British have withdrawn to New York City, and the colonial capital, Philadelphia, is back in American hands. Washington entrusts the city to one of his most celebrated generals, Benedict Arnold, who is now the military governor. Meanwhile, across the ocean in Paris, another celebrated patriot is anxiously awaiting news from the colonies. Benjamin Franklin, America's great statesman and emissary to France, is expecting word on the arrival of the French fleet in America. The internationally renowned scientist and statesman has been heartily enjoying the fine wine and refined women of France for the past year, and has used his patient diplomacy to convince this great superpower and enemy of the British to join the American side of the war. Now, 12 ships of the line under the command of the French Admiral Comte d'Estaing are under sail to aid the American cause. The hope is that the French fleet will help bring the war to a quick end, but the news from America is not good. A storm wreaks heavy damage to the ships, crippling the fleet and eliminating any chance of engaging the British.
The whole Franco-American alliance, it's a very, very awkward alliance. And it gets off to a very wobbly start. This makes up the impression that the French are a bunch of cowards who haven't really come to our rescue anyway. And so this much trumpeted alliance with our saviors, the French, begins to sound like it's a pipe dream. And Franklin's job from France is very much to eliminate that idea and to paint a happier picture of the alliance, to uplift the alliance, because this is our only hope.
To that end, Franklin engages in his own special brand of diplomacy, talking politics while socializing over games of chess in the salons of Paris. But Franklin's playful flirtations raised some eyebrows, in particular from an old nemesis who has recently arrived in France, John Adams. The 42-year-old New England conservative is one of the original firebrands who helped spark the American Revolution and is now an American envoy. Adams has been dispatched to work with Franklin at building the alliance with the French, but the two couldn't be a more unlikely pairing.
Franklin and Adams are a little bit like oil and water. They're two inherently different men. Adams arrives in France, and he is a man of schedules, he's a man of efficiency, he wants an answer now. Franklin realizes that what he's conducting is diplomacy, and diplomacy is not conducted in this rather rigid-minded way. So Adams's perception of Franklin is that he's dilatory, and he spends an enormous amount of time socializing, and that he's a little bit overly patient with things, and that he never gets a straight answer. That is all of it a definition, of course, of diplomacy.
Adams may be impatient, but for now there is little that can be done. So the mismatched couple will have to bide their time until the day the French Navy can finally come to the aid of the American cause. Back in the colonies, the fall of 1778 brings old problems to the doorstep of General George Washington. His army again faces chronic shortages, limited food, tattered clothing, and dwindling supplies, all compounded by an additional problem: no pay. It is a strain that weighs heavily on Officer Joseph Hodgkins, a 35-year-old cobbler from Massachusetts who has dutifully served in the war since its outset. Hodgkins has not been paid in months, a reality that is pushing even the most dedicated soldiers to weigh their commitment to the war against the needs of their families.
My dear, you say in your letter that you are afraid that I shall stay in the cause of liberty till I shall make myself a slave to it. I have too much reason to fear that will be the case. I hope to come home soon and see you. Wishing you good night. Your most kind and affectionate husband till death, Joseph Hodgkins.
For women like Joseph's wife, Sarah, life outside of the war has brought its own set of difficulties. In addition to raising their children, tending to the family business fills her days. And with the value of paper money dropping to 3 to 4 cents on the dollar, budgets are stretched and families are feeling the strain. The problems on the home front begin to have an impact in Washington's ranks. Many officers resign their commissions and return to civilian life to provide for their families. But as veterans of the fight for independence begin streaming out of the war, another group is finding their way in: slaves. They come from Rhode Island, a state desperate to fill its recruitment quotas, and are joining the fight seeking something all Americans are after: freedom. Slaveholding is common across many of the colonies during the Revolution, from the north to the south. And although the colony of Rhode Island was founded on principles of tolerance and equality, it has grown as a major port and market in the international slave trade. Now, Rhode Island's politicians see an untapped resource for filling their ranks.
The Rhode Island Regiment comes from a region that was, for the North, one of the major slave-holding regions. If they'd been in the South, they'd have been called plantations, but these are the largest slave-holding estates in the entire North. In order to fulfill their quota commitment, they offer to send some of their slaves. Now, in return for fighting for the Continental Army, the slaves are offered freedom.
The slaves are not the only ones tendered an offer. The Rhode Island government offers compensation to the slave owners for their property. But it is still up to the individual slave to agree to the enlistment.
Here is your choice. You can remain a slave, or you can support this new nation, and as a result of that support, this new nation and your master will recognize your freedom. Now, obviously, this is a very difficult situation because you can't be sure that you're going to get freedom if you fight. But the one thing you can be sure of, if you don't fight, you're going to remain a slave.
Soon, 1 out of every 4 able-bodied slaves in Rhode Island enlists in what becomes known as the 1st Rhode Island Regiment. And although George Washington once stood in opposition to having black slaves serve in his army, the new recruits are a welcome boost to his manpower-starved force.
One thing we should always remember, from the beginning of this country to the present, African Americans have had a certain faith in the American dream. And I'm not talking about 2 cars in every garage. I'm talking about the American dream of personal freedom and opportunity. That's something that America, in its rhetoric, handed out to the world from the very beginning as the reasons for its existence. I think many African American slaves took that seriously.
Meanwhile, in Philadelphia, the case against Benedict Arnold continues to build in the press. Serious charges that will have to be answered. Winter 1779. George Washington again faces crippling shortages of soldiers and supplies for his fighting force. Some of his officers have even begun to leave the ranks. It is another uphill struggle, not just for the Continental Army, but also for the military governor of Philadelphia, Benedict Arnold. The charges of corruption and abuse of power circulating in the press have been getting more frequent and more serious.
The essence of the charges against Arnold were that he had abused his office for his own personal profit, closing the shop so he could rake off business from those. He was just doing what was common practice at the time, but he got nailed for it.
The identity of the once anonymous person leveling the accusations is now known. The President of the Supreme Executive Council of Pennsylvania, in essence, the governor, Joseph Reed. The powerful Reed is a veteran of the Revolution who served under George Washington at the battles of New York and Brandywine. There he gained the confidence of the commander-in-chief. Reed's strong patriot zeal is matched only by his dislike for anything that smacks of loyalism. Now a civilian politician, Reed is on a mission to take the control of Philadelphia out of the hands of the Army and return it to his command under the state of Pennsylvania. And Arnold will be his sacrificial lamb. Reed publishes that 8 charges are being drawn up against Benedict Arnold. Stung by the accusations, Arnold launches an attack of his own, defending his actions and his honor.
Arnold did not believe that American Army officers such as himself should take any orders from a governor of Pennsylvania. And Reed did not believe that anyone was immune from the power of the civilian population. It really was a standoff between the two.
The heated exchange lasts for months in the Philadelphia press and catches the eye of another powerful body, the Continental Congress, which decides to take the matter into its own hands and convene a hearing. March 5th, 1779. In front of a congressional investigative committee, Arnold answers the charges leveled against him.
Arnold wanted to defend himself in the eyes of the American people as well as his fellow officers. And his statement is really a recitation of all that he did and all that he had lost. He'd been crippled for life. He'd been passed over for promotion several times, and he thought he had lost his honor with its lingering cloud over him.
After Arnold's eloquent defense, the committee rules that there is no intentional wrongdoing and refers the matter along to a friendly audience for the general, a military council. For Arnold, it is a victory, and at his request, a hearing date is set for May. But Joseph Reed has more plans for Arnold. He renews his attacks in the press and renews a correspondence with his old commander, George Washington. Reed demands that all of the charges be reinstated against Arnold and backs it with a threat of removing Pennsylvania's support and supplies from the war.
He tried to blackmail Washington. If Washington didn't court-martial Benedict Arnold, Washington would not have the army wagons he needed to move his armies the next year.
Desperate for supplies, Washington sees no choice but to consider the possibility. And in a terse, polite letter, postpones Arnold's hearing indefinitely.
When Washington agreed to the postponement, it really horrified Benedict Arnold. And he wrote probably his most wrenching letter to Washington at that time. If you think I'm guilty, well then try me and execute me. But after all I've done, don't leave me hanging and twisting here this long. And the day he wrote that letter to Washington, that is the turning point.
Now, Benedict Arnold, the bold American general, the savior at Saratoga, the capturer of Fort Ticonderoga, does the unthinkable. And with encouragement from his wife Peggy, reaches out to her old friend and enemy combatant, British Major John Andre, who is now the head of British intelligence. Arnold sends the dispatch signed only with the code name Monk. It offers information on the Continental Army in return for money. But above all, for the aggrieved Arnold, it is his way out of the American Army, which to him and Peggy has never fully appreciated his sacrifice and his service. As the war drags into its fourth year, frustrations begin to mount. Officer Joseph Hodgkins is again on the move. Memories of the failed battle still fresh in his mind. It is now clear that the end of the war, seemingly so close last summer, is but a distant hope. And at home, times are increasingly difficult. On just a soldier's pay, the Hodgkins family finances are stretched to the limit. For Joseph, it is time to go home to Ipswich, Massachusetts. "4 years, 4 months, and 27 days after turning out for the alarm at Lexington, Hodgkins resigns his commission and quits the war. He resumes his life as a citizen, a shoemaker, a husband, and a father, and will never return to the front lines again. The loss of veteran soldiers like Joseph Hodgkins hits Washington's army hard, especially now, as the war is pulled to a new, far-flung frontier. Indian raids on villages to the west have commanded the attention of Congress and the country, and revenge is being demanded. "1779 is shaping up to be a slow year for the Continental Army. Battlefield plans have been made and discarded. Rumors of British movements received, some true, some false. Just one assault, demanded by Congress and ordered by George Washington, will be the major campaign of the year. A foray north into the lands occupied by the nation of the Iroquois. Stretching east to west across land that will become New York State, the Iroquois nation consists of the Mohawk, the Oneida, the Onondaga, the Cayuga, the Seneca, and the Tuscarora. It is the largest confederation of tribes in the Northeast and would be a powerful addition to either side in the Revolution. For most of the war, Native American involvement has been a limited affair. various tribes making short-term deals for individual battles. Now, the Iroquois nation, like all who live on American soil, find themselves in a position to take a side in the war.
There's not a great option. It's the least painful option, or the option that seems to serve their interests. Partly it's a calculation about who is going to win this war, the British or the Americans.
But the British have an inside track, a strong connection to a Mohawk warrior named Joseph Brant. Born in Ohio, his Indian name, Ticonderoga, translates as "he who places two bets," an appropriate name for a man who has spent his life straddling white and Indian society. Born to Mohawk parents, he was introduced at an early age to a man of great wealth, the British Superintendent of Indian Affairs, Sir William Johnson, who took Joseph under his wing and raised him as his own son. Brant's family connection with Sir William Johnson lands him on a far-flung trip across the sea to another land, Great Britain. Presented as a representative of the Iroquois people, Brant meets with King George III and is promised that his people will be able to keep their lands after the war if they side with the crown. It is a promise Brant takes back with him to America, and he brings his case before the Iroquois Tribal Council.
There was a grand debate, reminiscent of our own debate about independence. All the warriors and the leaders and women were included in this debate as well. Joseph Brant started off. He said, "We have to join with somebody, because somebody's going to win." To which another respected warrior said, "War is war. Death is death. A fight is a hard business. We should be cautious before taking up the hatchet." This is a classic debate between hawks and doves. We see it over and over in history, and here it was in the Indian Council among the Iroquois. As in many such debates, the hawks prevail.
It is a decision that comes at a high price. 4 of the Iroquois tribes agree to take up arms for the British, but the Oneida and Tuscarora, swayed by missionaries loyal to the American cause, refuse Brant's appeal. Now, a divided people, the great council fire of the 6 nations, a symbol of tribal unity, is ritually extinguished. Once under British command, Brant and his warriors are ordered to raid villages along the New York frontier. But although they are fighting for their own land, Brant is portrayed much differently in the American press. He becomes known as the Monster Brant. Newspapers fill with vivid accounts of attacks, yet there are few articles of the vicious retaliation and assaults by American settlers. The press coverage of the Indian raids has an immediate effect, and George Washington is ordered by the Continental Congress to mount an offensive against the Iroquois, as they call them, the savages. Washington deploys the mission and leaves no doubt as to the goal.
The immediate objects are the total destruction and devastation of their settlements, and the capture of as many prisoners of every age and sex as possible. Lay waste all the settlements around, that the country may not be merely overrun, but destroyed. George Washington.
The language that the Americans use about overrunning and destroying is language that they would not use about the British. That was not how they were going to fight the British. They were going to do that in a very controlled way, whereas against Indians, it's the entire population who's under attack.
August 1779, 4,500 Continental soldiers descend upon their first target, the Iroquois border town of Newtown, New York. Washington's forces burn the village to the ground, and a mass exodus begins ahead of the advancing army. Thousands of Iroquois from the Mohawk, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca tribes march overland to the safety of the British forts to the west at Niagara.
The people, the Indian villages, the orchards,
the wheat fields, the corn fields, in other words, a scorched earth policy. It was intense. Nothing quite like it until Sherman's march through Georgia in American military annals.
If the idea was to destroy Indian resistance, it didn't work. The warriors had nothing left to live for other than to fight. So they continued to raid against the Patriot settlements the next year. As one American officer commented, the nests are destroyed, but the birds are still on the wing.
With the Iroquois now forced from their lands, George Washington turns his attention to another pressing matter: a decision on one of his most renowned generals, Benedict Arnold. Washington is eager to get the bold general back into the fight for the American cause, and is considering Arnold for a major field assignment.
Whenever George Washington needed an experienced field commander, he called on Benedict Arnold. Arnold knew that you had to attack the British, get out there and hit them and hit them and hit them again.
But before Washington can act on a new commission for Arnold, there is a political matter to tend to: a final ruling in the case against Arnold. Charges of profiteering while in charge of Philadelphia. Charges leveled by the governor of Pennsylvania, Joseph Reed. Reed, in his personal quest to show his power by seeing Arnold convicted, has backed the charges with a threat to withdraw Pennsylvania's support for the war. And Washington, needing all the supplies he can get, sees no choice but to give in. He issues a harsh rebuke against Arnold to placate Reed. But once the affair blows over, Washington can finally make General Arnold a glorious offer: a return to a field command. With no knowledge of Joseph Reed's threat, Arnold receives Washington's decision. The words are stinging, reprehensible, imprudent, improper. For the embattled American general, it is the last straw. Passed over for promotion, gravely injured at Saratoga, and now reprimanded by Washington, Arnold is pushed over the edge. Benedict Arnold will betray America. Arnold contemplates his terms: 20,000 pounds and a command of his own. Brigadier General in the British Army.
Arnold had changed since the Revolution began. He felt that he'd been given a very raw deal. I think the biggest misconception about Arnold's treason is he did it for the money. I don't think he did. I don't think it was as simple as that. He did it for his pride. The money was secondary.
In return, Arnold will offer a mighty fort to the Royals. It is the key to defending the Hudson River, and even bears the general's name, Fort Arnold, also known as West Point. Benedict Arnold has received a harsh rebuke from the American Commander-in-Chief, George Washington. It is the final straw for the brash general and pushes him over the edge. With the help of his wife, Benedict Arnold reaches out to British Major John Andre with an offer: money and a command of his own in return for the American stronghold that bears his name, Fort Arnold, also known as West Point. Just 60 miles north of New York City, West Point is a critical post on the banks of the Hudson River. Located in the middle of the Hudson Highlands, the fortress guards a sweeping S-curve in the mighty river.
At West Point, the river remains tidal, which is to say at some times of the day it flows south and at other times of the day it flows north. This made West Point an ideal place to mount cannons on both sides of the river as ships had to navigate this very tricky curve.
It is a prize that the British have coveted since the beginning of the war, but have never been able to take with a military offensive. Now, Arnold offers to deliver the post and begins to lobby George Washington for command of the fort. August 1st, 1780. George Washington summons Benedict Arnold to a meeting just south of West Point, New York. Washington has a surprise for the general, a powerful field assignment and glorious return to action. Control of the entire left wing of the Continental Army, and with it, 1/2 of America's best infantry. Washington takes his leave. The offer on the table is something that Benedict Arnold would have jumped at just months earlier, but his treasonous plot has been set in motion. Flustered, he pleads he is too crippled to assume the command. Only a stationary post. A desk job will do. It is a reaction that leaves the commander-in-chief confused.
George Washington was puzzled that Benedict Arnold would want the command of West Point. Washington wanted to put him back into the line of battle as his number 3 general. But Arnold insisted on West Point because that was the deal with the British.
Arnold refuses to back down, and Washington finally yields. The command of West Point is his. August 3rd. Now in charge, Arnold wastes no time in laying the groundwork for his treason.
As the new commandant of West Point, Benedict Arnold deliberately weakened the fortifications, transferred men to distant posts where they couldn't reinforce in a British attack, moved guns around, and would have made it very easy for the British to take the place.
Arnold prepares detailed intelligence on West Point. Troop numbers and positions, the number and location of the cannon, details of the surrounding terrain, and sends word to British Major John Andre that he is ready for a meeting. Arnold's treason is just days away. September 21st, 2 a.m. Just south of West Point, on the banks of the Hudson River, Benedict Arnold and John Andre meet for the first and last time. Arnold goes over the plans with Andre in great detail, making sure they are clear, that no question goes unanswered, that the plot is complete. It is a thoroughness that takes time. The meeting lasts for more than 2 hours, and when the two-part company, Andre carefully slips the plans into his boot. September 24th. Breakfast at the Arnold residence is a seemingly normal affair. Today, Arnold is expecting a special guest, General George Washington. It will be his last meeting with Washington, after which he and Peggy will slip behind enemy lines. But Arnold receives a dispatch that changes everything. John Andre has been captured, and on him the plans to West Point. Arnold believes that it is only a matter of time before the plot is uncovered. He rushes to Peggy's room. Together they burn any evidence of the treasonous plot. And taking 2 pistols and a horse, Arnold makes a hasty getaway. When Washington arrives at the Arnold home, it is clear that something is amiss. An officer brings the news of Andre's capture and the confiscated documents, but Arnold is nowhere to be found. The terrible, incredible truth strikes him. Only one man could generate such detailed maps, the commandant of the fort. Benedict Arnold has sold out to the British. The remaining question is, who else knew of the plot? Washington goes to Peggy Shippen's room. But to the commander's eyes, she is suffering from the shock of her husband's treason.
When Washington arrives at the house, she is weeping, crying that this terrible thing has happened. She's had nothing to do with it. She knows nothing about it. Washington buys this.
George Washington was a sexist. He didn't believe a woman could have pulled off such an act or been at the heart and the brain of such a plot.
October 2nd, noon. 10 days after his capture, John Andre is the one who pays for the treason of Benedict Arnold. His request for an officer's death by firing squad is denied. He will suffer the death of a spy and hang. Ever the honorable English gentleman, Andre puts on his own blindfold and his own noose. At just 30 years of age, John Andre is both the youngest and highest-ranking officer executed in the Revolution. In British-held New York City, there is a new officer in their ranks, a Connecticut-born patriot, a hero in the revolutionary cause, British Brigadier General Benedict Arnold.
Were it not for his treason, he would almost undoubtedly be one of the most celebrated American commanders of all of the American Revolution. West Point to this day would probably still be called Fort Arnold rather than West Point.
If the Americans had lost the Revolution, Benedict Arnold would have been Duke Arnold, and Washington would have been hanged, drawn, and quartered. Treason's tricky. It depends on which side you are.
Arnold will follow the war to the southern states in charge of his own Loyalist brigade with his wife Peggy, now banished from Philadelphia, by his side. Arnold's treason is the highest in the young history of America. It is an act that shakes George Washington to the core. That one of his highest-ranking generals could betray the rebel cause raises questions. Who else might be considering the same? He will pursue Arnold throughout the rest of the war with a singular goal: to bring the traitor to justice. December 1779. As the fourth year of the American Revolution comes to an end, the war is at a stalemate. Many battles have been won and lost, but neither side has taken the advantage. British General Henry Clinton has a firm grip on New York City, but the King's forces have been unable to crush the rebellion, as George Washington's army continues to hold them in check. Now camped 30 miles to the west of New York City, the Americans are bracing themselves for another long winter. 13,000 strong, they settle into their quarters at Morristown, New Jersey. It has been 2 years since the Continental Army survived the legendary conditions at Valley Forge, but this winter will surpass all others.
The winter encampment in Morristown was a lot harder than the encampment in Valley Forge. Valley Forge seems to get all the press, but Morristown was really dire straits.
Valley Forge was a disaster because of the lack of supplies and the bungling. Morristown was the elements. It was said to be the worst winter in the history of North America. There were 26 snowstorms, 6 of blizzard proportions. It was so cold that in the month of January, on all but 2 days, the temperature was below freezing.
This is truly the winter that tries men's souls. At Valley Forge, it took 4 weeks to build the Army's cabins. But at Morristown, blizzard conditions slow the progress, and the construction takes months. Many soldiers are forced to sleep under canvas tents or lie in the snow. Compounding the soldiers' suffering is the fact that once again, food is in critically short supply.
The countryside is covered with snow, but really the areas of Morristown just does not have enough food to supply the army.
Soldiers fill their diaries with accounts of the cruel conditions.
We were absolutely, literally starved. I do solemnly swear that I did not put a morsel in my mouth for 4 days and as many nights, except a little black birch bark, which I gnawed off a stick of wood. I saw several of the men roast their old shoes and eat them. Private Joseph Plumbarton.
It is yet another low point in Washington's career. His desk piles high with letters from generals pleading for supplies. Washington petitions Congress for aid, but to no avail.
Inflation had soared to hundreds of percent. The American money was practically worthless. And they had a hard time with taxes on the states, many people to pay their taxes. Congress was nearly bankrupt. So it's catch as catch can.
With no food and few supplies, Washington faces the very real possibility of being forced to dissolve his army. Charleston, South Carolina. 800 miles to the south, it is a very different winter. 4 years into the war, the South is mostly untouched. Here in the bustling hub of commerce and trade, life goes on undisturbed. The wealthy partake heartily in the pleasantries of social life. Dances and dinners fill the evenings, a far cry from the hardships faced by an army fighting for their liberty. Charleston has been threatened only once by the British. A poorly executed attack in 1776 that was easily fended off. From the looks of it, Charleston is hardly part of a nation at war. All that is about to change. Across the ocean in England, a new strategy for the war is about to be unleashed. In the halls of Parliament, it has been a year scarred by angry debate. The British national debt has soared to over £160 million, due in large part to the prolonged war, and there is no end in sight.
I don't think anyone is more surprised than the British that they haven't won yet. They're a very wealthy nation. They have the most professionally trained army, and they have the most powerful navy in the world.
The question they're asking is, why isn't this thing over yet? This should have been an easy victory. And so there are questions about what to do next.
The figureheads of British leadership, like Prime Minister Lord North, are frequent targets in the daily papers, held responsible for a costly and increasingly unpopular war. A war where the stakes have been raised by the entrance of their archenemy, France, into the fight, on the American side.
Surrendering American independence is one thing, and that's something that has to be dealt with. But allowing France to emerge from this conflict with the upper hand is wholly unacceptable to the entire political nation, to all of the governing elite.
Under the gun now to turn the course of the fight, British policymakers unveil a dramatic new direction for the war. It becomes known as the Southern Strategy.
The British look at the map of the colonies and they think, well, we know Boston is just a hotbed, forget them. That was the first place we lost. We have these centers in New York, temporarily in Philadelphia, but the countryside is too unpredictable.
British hoped in the South to establish a foothold in North America that could be a permanent foothold. Here is the wealthiest part of the 13 colonies, right? Here are the major source of export goods, tobacco and grain and rice and indigo and naval stores, right? All of these come from the southern colonies.
The key to the British Southern strategy is the belief that their efforts will be supported by loyalists, the Americans still loyal to the Crown. The British believe they will be received as liberators, and that thousands of loyalist militia will pour out and join their cause.
The assumption was that most colonists, given the chance, would be loyalists. By moving south, they were moving to an area where they hoped that they could finally restore British authority and put the loyalists in charge.
All that remains now is putting their plan into action. December 26, 1779, British headquarters, New York City. With his orders from the British ministry now in hand, Commander-in-Chief Henry Clinton makes preparations to carry them out. This is Clinton's first offensive action, one that is so important that he himself will lead the assault. But he is filled with a sense of foreboding. Clinton has watched 2 other British commanders fail at winning this war, and doesn't want his name added to the list.
If the seizure of the other southern states doesn't work, it's not clear what will work. Clinton is as concerned with how his actions will be interpreted, how he will be judged, that awareness of, if I don't handle this right, what's this going to mean for my reputation back at home?
The general's neck is squarely on the line. His success or failure could determine the outcome of the war, and no one knows it better than Clinton himself.
This is the most important hour Britain ever knew. If we lose it, we shall never see such another. British General Henry Clinton.
The British leave New York City with more than 100 ships and a force of 8,700. Roughly 1/3 of the British Army in America. Their destination, Charleston, South Carolina. News that the British fleet has set sail reaches Washington in Morristown, New Jersey. But the commander-in-chief is powerless. A cruel winter march south is no option for his starving army. He must let the British go. Charleston will have to fend for itself. January 1780. The British have launched an armada out of New York City. 8,700 soldiers heading for a southern offensive in Charleston, South Carolina. But Washington, with no navy, and his army snowed in at Morristown by the worst winter the war has seen, cannot follow, leaving Charleston and his southern army to fend for themselves. 800 miles south of Washington's winter camp, Benjamin Lincoln, the new commander of the Continental Southern Army, is assuming his duties. The Major General was dispatched south 3 months earlier by Washington himself and is now in command of nearly 2,400 soldiers. But the Massachusetts farmer is an unlikely choice for a commander.
Benjamin Lincoln is one of the most interesting generals, perhaps, of the entire American Revolution. He's sort of a paradox. Lincoln is a rotund New England Continental Army officer. He suffers from sleep apnea, oftentimes falling asleep at the most inopportune moments, and he does not possess the kind of battlefield charisma that one would want in a combat commander. He is, however, a masterful compromiser. He is a great politician, and in large measure this helps explain the reason that he assumes command of the Southern Department.
Lincoln's task is first and foremost the defense of Charleston, South Carolina, the city known as the Jewel of the South. Clustered on a low, sandy spit of land, Charleston sits on a peninsula at the junction of the Ashley and Cooper rivers. It is the fourth largest city in America, with 12,000 residents. Its deep water harbor makes Charleston the South's most important port. Rice, indigo, and naval stores leave daily, headed to Europe and the West Indies.
You're looking at one of the richest sections of the colonies. Charleston, by value of its export, is the richest port in America at the time.
And nature has endowed Charleston with a superior defensive position. Surrounded by impassable swamps teeming with malaria-ridden mosquitoes, the terrain is forbidding to any who dare take her. January 10th, 1780. Benjamin Lincoln receives a dispatch from spotters along the coast. A massive British force is approaching. With his command barely underway, Lincoln will have to face down England's army. Lincoln immediately petitioned South Carolina's government to recruit and raise more troops. But his request is denied. It is not the first time the South Carolinians have frustrated the Patriot cause. Many view the colony's citizens as reluctant revolutionaries, voting for independence only under tremendous pressure from the other colonies. And on the floor of the Continental Congress, South Carolina's seeming unwillingness to raise troops has ignited heated debates.
How can South Carolina expect us to send our men to their support when they will do nothing for themselves?
The state of South Carolina may have thought we neglected them, but we know they neglected themselves.
But in this case, losing the coastal port of Charleston to the British would be too great an economic blow. So Congress promises General Lincoln 3,000 additional troops from Virginia and North Carolina, with a march of 500 miles ahead of them. It is unlikely the reinforcements will arrive in time. With his back against the wall, the New Englander proposes a last-ditch idea to South Carolina's government. Arm 1,500 black slaves and turn them into soldiers. If they refuse, Lincoln will leave Charleston to the British. South Carolina's response is immediate. The request is denied as totally impractical.
Even though their backs were to the wall when the British Army moved south, they could not bear the risk of putting weapons in the arms of black men.
They were very concerned about what might happen should they start arming their slaves. I mean, to arm those people you have formerly held in captivity might be a suicidal thing to do, and they understood this.
With reinforcements hundreds of miles away and no black recruits, the defense of Charleston is looking more and more futile.
At that point, Lincoln's choice was either to get the army out of the city and give it up, or to stay in the city. In the best of all possible worlds, Lincoln should have left Charleston and gone to the countryside.
But the general's sense of honor and duty prevents him from abandoning his post. And retreat, however wise, would open him to accusations of cowardice. Undermanned, undersupplied, and unsupported, Lincoln will make his stand at Charleston. He communicates his plight to his commander-in-chief, General Washington.
We remain unsupported by troops, unsupplied, and what adds to the unhappiness is the little prospect that our affairs will speedily be in a better channel. General Benjamin Lincoln.
But from New Jersey, there is little Washington can do. With his army half a country away and nearly starving, moving his sizable force south is out of the question.
Washington wants to send men from Morristown. He can't send men because the men he wants to send have no shoes. They can't walk, so no army is sent.
February 11th, 1780. After a harrowing journey on the frigid, windswept seas of the Atlantic, British General Henry Clinton and his force of nearly 9,000 soldiers finally reached their destination, landing 20 miles south of Charleston. The army now unloads and begins its northward march. On February 16th, the British crossed the Stono River, taking control of James Island, which sits right across the harbor from Charleston. Then, finally, at the end of March, crossed the Ashley River in force. The British Southern Campaign is underway, and the city of Charleston is in their sights. The British Army has set out on a new course in the War for Independence, taking the fight to the southern colonies of America. Now, 8,700 soldiers, roughly 1/3 of the British Army in America, have come ashore in South Carolina, and under the command of General Henry Clinton, have begun their push to close in on their goal, Charleston. At his headquarters within the city, General Benjamin Lincoln readies himself for the British assault. There is no sign of the 3,000 soldiers promised by Congress a month earlier, and his army is severely outnumbered. So the general prepares for his defense the only way he knows how. Lincoln rolls up his sleeves and grabs a shovel. The Massachusetts farmer throws his back into his command, working day and night right beside his men. The Americans build earthen walls, lay trenches, and create as many obstacles as possible, all designed to slow the progress of the British Army. But Lincoln knows that unless there are reinforcements, the outcome of this fight is inevitable. With the soldiers' resolve, Lincoln writes once again to his commander-in-chief, George Washington.
I can promise you nothing but a disposition to serve my country and to defend Charleston as long as opposition can be any avail. General Benjamin Lincoln.
April 1st, 1780, Day 1. 800 yards west of the American fortifications at Charleston, the British begin their offensive with a shovel rather than a cannon. General Clinton's goal is to take Charleston intact. If he destroys the town, he fears the citizens will refuse the Crown's authority. Instead, he will surround Charleston and conduct a highly structured, formal assault on the city. A siege.
A siege is a very methodical and time-consuming reduction of a strategic place. The engineers will begin to dig what is called the first parallel. Parallel trenches are essentially concentric circles dug around the post. The siege is rather similar to an incremental tightening of a noose.
Helping to construct the first British parallel is a labor force that is seeking its own freedom in the War of Independence, slaves who have joined the British side. They have come from the countryside, enticed by the Philipsburg Proclamation, a renewal of Lord Dunmore's 1775 edict. It offers freedom and land to any slave who joins the British cause.
The British understood the colonies. They knew that South Carolina's population, the majority of its population, was African American slaves. And they also knew that these African American slaves were a potential fifth column. If you think about it for a moment, if you are an army opposing an enemy and you know that that enemy holds under its grip people who are enslaved, and you know darn well that those people don't want to be enslaved and would do anything within their power to break that grip, it's only natural that you would use that to your advantage, and that's precisely what the British did.
Slaves can't just walk off the plantation and enlist with the British. They have to escape. For the slave families, it is a difficult and dangerous decision.
Some slaves are very likely to make the decision to run to the British, while others will stay on the plantation, say, no, I'm not willing to take the chance. I'll probably end up getting shot anyway. Those are the kinds of calculations that have to be made plantation by plantation, family by family.
Over time, thousands of slaves escape and go to the British lines to fight for their freedom.
When you are presented with the choice of staying in slavery or the very real possibility of having the bonds of slavery broken, that's no choice. So that slaves were often ready to throw in their lot with the British, even if they didn't know precisely what might happen, because, you know, it's not the choices that you want, but it's the choice that you have.
The siege of Charleston enters its 5th day, and the methodical work of the British assault continues. Nights are spent digging trenches, and by sunrise, each side wakes up just a little bit closer to the other. From his barracks in Charleston, an anonymous American soldier is just beginning to feel the effects of the attack and charts the British progress.
Last night, the enemy continued their approaches. They erected a battery for 12 cannon. The batteries have thrown several shots into town, by which one of the inhabitants in King Street was killed.
Day 7. From the north comes the news American General Benjamin Lincoln has been waiting for. Relief is on the way. The Continental soldiers promised by Congress have arrived and are making their way into the city. Marching double time, they have made the 505-mile journey from Virginia in just 30 days. Charleston citizens greet the soldiers with cheers and the hourly pealing of bells. The celebration on the streets of Charleston stands in stark contrast to the somber mood of Benjamin Lincoln's headquarters. Rather than the 3,000 soldiers promised, the Virginians number just 750. These numbers fall far too short. Bearing down on the city are 10,000 British redcoats. Day 8. The British take their aim on Charleston Harbor as a group of warships runs the narrow channel under cannon fire from Fort Moultrie, the American outpost protecting the inlet. A Hessian soldier fighting on the British side witnesses the scene from the shore.
It was the most majestic and beautiful spectacle that one can imagine. The fort was veiled in fire and smoke, and the roar of 43 heavy guns resembled a terrible thunderstorm. Despite all dangers threatening the fleet, it sailed quite slowly past the fort with colors flying proudly. Captain Johann Ewald.
With his fleet now safely in Charleston Harbor, Henry Clinton's forces encircle nearly all of the city. Day 10. From their position of strength, the British now send the Americans an ultimatum: give up the fight and surrender. General Lincoln's response is immediate. He will not yield his post.
The protocol of war at that time mandated that the defending commander keep the fight up at least long enough to meet the minimal dictates of honor in that time. So the besieged commander would always routinely decline the first offer of surrender.
British General Henry Clinton has gotten the response he expected. It strengthens his resolve.
They will now defend the town, and when we take it, we shall take all in it. Sir Henry Clinton.
Day 14. The British parallels continue creeping closer and closer to Charleston. Shelling fills the days as hot lead rains on the town. Just one escape path remains open to the Americans. Along the Cooper River to a crossroads called Monk's Corner. Running through a series of shallow crossings along the river's edge, the route serves as the last communication link between Charleston and the South Carolina backcountry. A lone Continental garrison is stationed at Monk's Corner. Their charge is a vital one. Keep the route open. For the British, it is the last target needed to encircle the city. The man charged with taking the post is a brash, young, and vicious cavalryman, Bannister Tarleton. The 24-year-old Tarleton is as ambitious as they come. Described as full of enterprise and spirit and anxious of every opportunity of distinguishing himself, he has risen quickly through the British ranks.
Bannister Tarleton is one of Clinton's most capable subordinate commanders. He is a dashing young cavalry commander, and he understands how to fight in this theater. But his actions are all directed at the decisive destruction of enemy combat power.
Tarleton is known for his daring, for moving his cavalry quickly, quick hits. He's also known for no restraint.
At Monk's Corner, Tarleton unleashes a daring plan on the Americans. A surprise attack. Under the cover of night, Tarleton and his men make their move. They strike fast, hard, and without mercy, catching the Continental garrison completely off guard. In the thick of the attack, an American officer's pleas for surrender are met with a saber. Monk's Corner becomes Tarleton's calling card. It is not the last time the Americans will face the brash cavalry officer. The final road out of Charleston is now closed. April 1780. The siege of Charleston, South Carolina enters its third week, with the British painstakingly inching their way towards the city's continental defenses. With the last road out now shut down, British General Clinton begins tightening his noose around the city's very neck. Day 18. Behind the defensive line, there is the terrifying and constant barrage of cannon fire. For an anonymous Continental soldier, the strain of the siege is beginning to show.
The enemy continued firing from their cannon, mortars, and small arms. A sentinel near the advanced redoubt had his arm shut off by one of our own cannon. The enemy continued to approach. And we hear that our cavalry have been defeated and that we lost between 20 and 30 killed and wounded among them.
It's hard for us today to imagine what it's like to be inside a city that's being besieged. You're worrying about these incessant artillery shells coming in, and you're probably worrying all the time about what eventually is going to happen. What's going to happen when the enemy gets in here?
Day 21. In the American headquarters, General Benjamin Lincoln finds himself in the middle of an angry debate. Some of his officers want to take a desperate action, a dangerous water retreat under cover of night.
Lincoln knows, really, he should leave the city. It was heated, a very heated confrontation.
But with the British fleet sitting just off the city, moving his force across a river would be suicide. So Lincoln sends out a flag of truce and a request for a 6-hour break from fighting. Having already rejected British General Clinton's offer of surrender, Lincoln now proposes his own terms. He will give up Charleston, and in return, his forces will be allowed to retreat for 10 days unmolested, with its arms, military stores, and baggage. In addition, he asks for the guaranteed protection of the residents' property. Those who wanted could sell their goods off and leave the city. It would be a free evacuation with the honors of war, the most lenient surrender in a formal siege. But British General Clinton will have none of it. His goal is complete capitulation by the Americans. He returns the note and includes his terms: a total surrender.
A total surrender or an unconditional surrender is perhaps one of the most humiliating defeats that an enemy can suffer. A commander will not make an offer or demand a total surrender or unconditional surrender unless he is confident in his ability to finish the job by force of arms.
Lincoln refuses the offer. The terms, unacceptable. It will be a fight to the end. Day 30. The British parallels have closed to within 500 feet of the earthen defenses protecting Charleston. At this distance, cannon can be fired with accuracy into the city. But even at this close range, the British are still looking for some sign of the effect of their barrage, some intelligence on the mood of their enemy. Clinton's men intercept a letter from an American militiaman to his wife. It confirms the state of mind in the besieged city.
Our affairs are daily declining. Nothing prevents Lincoln's surrender but a point of honor in holding out to the last extremity. This is nearly at hand, as our provisions will soon fail. The enemy have continued their approaches with vigor, and in a short time will plant the British standard on our ramparts. This will give a rude shock to the independence of America. The 13 stripes will be leveled in the dust, and I will owe my life to the clemency of a conqueror, Benjamin Smith.
Clinton publishes the letter for all his men to see and increases the cannon barrage. Day 38. In the American headquarters, Benjamin Lincoln is trying to salvage his defense, to hold out in hope of additional reinforcement or come up with some plan that might turn the course of the siege. Now, devastating news arrives from his lines. The South Carolinian militia has abandoned their posts within the city. And now the citizens of Charleston are saying that they have had enough. Major General Benjamin Lincoln, commander of the Southern Department of the Continental Army, has run out of options. The siege of Charleston has ground on for more than a month, and the British rain a constant barrage of cannon and mortar fire down upon the town. With Charleston completely surrounded, it is only a matter of time before British forces breach the defenses of the city and are able to overrun the town. Now General Clinton prepares a final offer for the Americans: complete and total surrender. Day 41. The terms of surrender reach General Benjamin Lincoln's desk, and he now faces the reality of his situation. The time has come to give up the fight, to to yield his post. The British cannon finally fall silent. May 12, 1780. Surrender. America's Southern Army strikes the flag of its new nation and lays down its weapons. The entire Charleston garrison, more than 5,000 Continental soldiers and militia, are now prisoners to the British. It is the heaviest loss the Americans have suffered in the Revolution. General Benjamin Lincoln's war is over for now. He returns in defeat to his Massachusetts farm as a prisoner of the British on parole. Charleston, the jewel of the South, belongs to the King. British General Henry Clinton savors his victory. He cannot hide his optimism about a smooth and easy road to capturing the other southern colonies. He sends word home to England.
I hope I am not too sanguine when I say that both the Carolinas are conquered in Charleston. British General Henry Clinton.
In England, the news from America is cause for a much overdue celebration. It has been 3 years since their army, the most powerful in the world, has had such a decisive win. Finally, the tide of war is turning. The Southern strategy is a seeming success. Back in the American headquarters at Morristown, celebration is the last thing on George Washington's mind. The final dispatch from Charleston has arrived. His Southern army is now lost. It is another defeat for the Americans, one that the commander-in-chief had been powerless to stop. The brutal winter of 1780 has taken a mighty toll on his army.
It was a long winter. It snowed in May. Soldiers are starving.
The dire conditions have pushed some to the very edge. Dissension is growing in the ranks. Insubordination runs rampant. Some soldiers even threaten to take matters into their own hands, to mutiny. It is a decisive and dangerous moment for the Continental Army. George Washington must step forward and restore order. The commander-in-chief carefully chooses his moment to take action. May 26, 1780. 8 nooses, prepared for 8 men. They are soldiers brought here on a variety of charges: insubordination, forging documents, theft. All are sentenced to death. Washington orders the execution be held before the entire camp, for all of his men to see. It is a carefully choreographed event.
Washington wanted to use punishment, a capital punishment, particularly sparingly, but he also knew it was great theater.
All 8 were put on top of the gallows. Nooses were put around their heads. Their graves had been dug in front of the gallows, and their coffins, which he ordered manufactured, placed next to the graves.
The goal of a public execution is to instill awe in the audience, awe for the power of military authority. But you can make it into better theater by pardoning and offering a last-minute reprieve.
As they were about to be hung, a soldier stepped forward from the crowd. Reprieve. Reprieve from the commander-in-chief. 7 of the 8 were freed.
So you have both awe in the punishment and then gratitude for the reprieve, and the audience experience all of these things at the same time.
On this day, just one man will hang for his crimes. It is a warning to all in Washington's army of the consequence for insubordination. For Washington, these are some of the darkest days. The British Southern strategy flourishes, while simultaneously it looks as if the American army is coming undone at the seams. And without the army, there is no revolution.
I find our prospects are infinitely worse than they have been at any other period of the war. I look forward to the consequences with an anxiety not to be described. George Washington.
The commander-in-chief cannot help but question the future of the war he once called this glorious cause.